Hi there. Welcome to this video where we discuss about pivot tables. So when I teach professionals Excel, I would say 100% of the time they know how to create a pivot table, but it's only the main challenge arrives in how to plan your analysis of the data. So that's where they generally get stuck. So that's what we will be focusing on in this particular video, where we'll be planning how to create a pivot table and then go about it. In order for us to do this, we have a simple data set here. This is data set regarding past loan customers. And there are two statuses here. They have either defaulted on their loan or they have fully paid. And then there are some interesting fields like loan amounts, credit score, annual income, home ownership of the customers, the purpose for which they took the loans. So there are some interesting fields here as well. So you'll be using this dataset to create pivots. So to make the whole process a little more simpler, I've converted this into a table. So you can see that the table design is enabled and this table is called loans. Perfect. So before we create a pivot, let's go and plan it out. So the first pivot that we want to create is I want to show the loan status by the row and then the corresponding count of customers, like how many customers have fully paid off their loans and how many have defaulted. So this is just a basic planning, right, to visualize in our mind how is it that we actually want to see the pivot. So keeping this in mind, let's go and create the first pivot. I can click anywhere in my table right now, click on the insert tab and pivot table. Okay, so it identifies the table name loans. By default, it's always the new worksheet, so we'll keep to that and click OK. Perfect. So now we have the canvas, the pivot table canvas on the left-hand side, and all the fields are displayed on the right. So depending, based on what we were actually planning to implement, we wanted the rows to show the loan status. So let's go and do exactly that. Let me click on loan status and drag it down into these sections. So if you can notice here, there are four sections: filters, columns, rows, and values. So the loan status, I will drag this into the rows section. Perfect. So this is exactly how we wanted it to look like. And then in terms of the values that we want to be shown, we want to show the count of customers. So it's always best practice that if you want to show count, you can click and drag string-based values or text-based fields into the value section. So we have the customer ID column, which is just an alphanumeric field. So if I just click and drag it down into values, by default, it would show the count. So if it was a numeric field, by default, it would show the sum, which you could go and change by clicking on the drop down here and going into the value field settings. Okay, perfect. So we've got the information that we were looking for. We've got the count. And there you go. So that's exactly what we were looking for. So this is a very simple pivot table that we've managed to create. So let's move now to the next aspect that we want to cover. So going forward, let's say we want to see the same data set in this manner. So that means we have the loan status show up as rows, but we want to show the home ownership column. So if you come back to the raw data here, there is a column called as home ownership. So there are three different values here, as you can see: rent, home mortgage, and own home. So I want to show this as columns, so which will split this grand total of 200, for example. So what do I have here? I have loan status as rows and your home ownership as columns. So keeping that in mind, let's go and revise this pivot table here. So come here, everything else remains the same. So I just scroll down to home ownership, click and drag this to the columns. Perfect. So that's exactly how I visualize the data and I get what I want. Perfect. So I hope you understand where I'm coming from here. So if you're able to visualize what you want, you will spend lesser amount of time on your pivots. You'll be able to get exactly what you want. So it's not necessary that you create a sheet and do things like this. You can scribble on a piece of paper as well. So it gives you a good idea as to how to go about it. So at the initial stages, when you're working with pivots, this kind of an approach can help you save a lot of time. Perfect. Let's go one step further. So this is another visualization that we've had. So here, instead of having different columns for showing the home ownership, we want everything clubbed together as a single row. So that means the loan status as well as the home ownership is showing in a single row. And there's only one column showing all the values. So then, since we have this picture in mind, it becomes a little more easier for us. What we will do is home ownership that we have dragged into the columns section, we can drag it down to rows. So that will always be after the loan status because that's how we had planned it out. Correct? So there you go. So you have the loan status show up as the parent and the corresponding child field is the home ownership. Perfect. So you can always switch it as well. So you can change the order here and it will change it accordingly. Perfect. So I hope you got the idea of this. So when you're working with pivots for the first time, it's always best to have a plan in mind. So you spend lesser amount of time in creating the pivot. So pivot tables can be made really complex, but we'll just explore one more aspect of this before we wrap up this video. So we have one section that we have not looked at, which is filters. So now if you look at it, it's basically showing the summary of the entire data. So if I go into this data set, there are 24,642 rows. So this summary here is shown for the entire data set for all the rows. But what if we want to create a subset? That means we want to exclude some aspects in this data. So let's take an example from here. So as you can see, there are more fields that we can filter into. There's something called as purpose here, purpose for which people have taken loans. So let's put that in. Let's see how this is going to work. So what we will do is we'll take purpose and put it into filters. Okay. So as of now, we are not seeing any changes because all the purpose values are included in my pivot table. So, but I can go in here and pick the ones that I want. So let's say I want to find out only those customer loan transactions for which people wanted to buy a car and a house, for example. So let me see how that stacks up. So if I click on OK, I'm only seeing a subset of the data. Okay, so that's a total of 456 customers. Okay, so I hope you got the point. So now we basically got to understand what are the different sections, what each section means, and always planning the layout at the initial stages will help you working with pivots. Okay, so in the next video, we'll focus on the formatting aspects of the pivot table. So till I meet you in the next video, it's bye from me.